Hi everyone, it's Jerry. About 1 month before I created this ChessNetwork YouTube channel, Magnus Carlsen was competing against his dad, Henrik Carlsen, at the Arctic Chess Challenge held in Tromsø, Norway. This game was played on April 8th, 2007. Both Magnus and Henrik accumulated 3.5 tournament points out of their first 5 rounds. And sure enough, come round 6, they were paired up. They were sitting across the board from one another. Magnus, playing with the white pieces, 16 years old at the time, with a rating of about 2,700. His father, playing with the black pieces, of course, just shy of a 2,100 rating. 2,089 to be exact. So let's dive in and see the type of beating Magnus was prepared to give Papa Bear over the board. Rumor has it that before the game started, Henrik said to his son Magnus, "If you beat me, you're grounded." That's totally made up, but I think it's kind of funny if something like that would have happened. Funny for everybody except for Magnus, right? d4 on board. Papa Bear replying with knight to f6. c4, e6, we're entering a queen's gambit, declined, exchange variation, and with bishop to g5, this is noted as the positional line. Pinning the knight to the queen, that is broken, e3, c6, and queen to c2. Not deploying the kingside minor pieces just yet. Queen c2 is designed to prevent bishop to f5. If bishop f5 was played one move sooner, there can be some problems with a capture on f6, and then queen to b3. There's an issue with both d5 and b7. So, okay, c6, queen c2 on board. A little jab is thrown at the bishop, and a flight square is produced. White ducks, castles, bishop to d3. There's a little battle going on over the e4 square, multiple pieces competing for that square, knight and pawn on black's end, and white's pieces are pointing there as well. Rook to e8, observing e4 indirectly. Knight g to e2. There's knight to f3, there's knight to e2. By playing to e2, white keeps open the option for a central expansion. f3 and e4, to be more specific. Black plugs up that e4 hole. Bishops are exchanged. Black is recapturing with the queen and developing. And now we have bishop takes knight. Pawn takes, of course, and a big change just occurred from that. Minor piece imbalance is now present, as well as a slight shift in the structure. This pawn now could potentially move. Following up, we have knight to g3, adding some fire, more fire to e4. There's only one way to adequately defend e4. f5 is it. Castles. Knight to a6 is looking to now sink into the d3 square, if white is not careful. So that's ruled out. Knight to c7. And now f3, breaking down, chipping away at this structure, this lead pawn, this head pawn on e4. E takes f. Rook takes. And white is now exerting pressure on f5. We're 17 moves in. And this is where black slips up. Black goes for f4 here, pitching a pawn in order to activate the bishop. Better is for black to simply lend some more support to the f5 point. Rook to f8. It's not a fun move to do, to pull a rook off of this half-open file and go to one where, you're just babysitting a pawn, but it's necessary to defend f5, and rook to f8 is one of the better ways. Better, in my opinion, than g6, is kind of want to keep this structure around to be your king's shelter. A g7 h6 structure. Rook to f8 was not played though. f4 pitches a pawn, and yeah, it's really just a difficult road ahead after this advance. E takes f, bishop to g4. That's just sidestep, simple enough. Rook to d8, and now there's a big issue with this last move. I wonder if you can spot it. There's a really good move that Carlsen, which Carlsen? There's a really good move that Magnus plays here on move 20. If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. What move would you play here as white? Okay, the move played, f5. Why is this so powerful? Well, where's this bishop going? This advance is now preventing the bishop from retreating along this diagonal. He is now very limited. No safe squares besides the one he sits on, and that is soon to be taken away. So he's in some serious hot water, and now black has to try to stir up some trouble, but it's just short-lived, any attempt to muddy the waters here. Henrik captures on d4. Magnus replying with queen to f2. There's no rush with playing h3. Queen f2 is throwing a punch at the rook and, preventing queen to e3 with check. Black goes in for a queen exchange. h3 is there. Yep, not too many good squares for that bishop. Black is in some really big trouble. Rook to d2 is tried. Queens are exchanged. And now we have a nice move. There's multiple good moves here for white. Rook to f2 was played, offering a rook exchange. On rook takes rook, if this is played, white would recapture, and now there's two issues for black to cope with. So what is attempted here is rook takes knight. One other quick variation, if let's say rook to d3, there can simply follow knight to f1, parrying black's threat, and we have another case where now there are two issues for Team Black. Two pieces are under fire. So what was played in the game is rook takes knight, allowing rook takes rook, and bishop takes pawn. So white is, just taking a moment here, white is up the exchange, has a rook versus a bishop in this case, right? The knight's offset, a pair of rooks offset, and so what's remaining really is a rook versus bishop type position, and well, black also has a pawn for it. 5 pawns versus white's 4. But this is not going to be enough. The rook is just far superior than the bishop in this endgame. So Magnus just activates the rook that was in the corner. Both are really good here on these central files, the D and E files. King to f7. The bishop is now thrown into a pin. Black gets out of it, but now we have a rook entering on the 6th rank. Any even exchanges are favoring white, and eventually this is what happens. Rook to e1. King to f7, defending the bishop and getting out of this pin. But now, here comes the knight, throwing a punch at the rook, eyeing up the c5 square. That happens. Knight c5 is hitting everything now, so not too much to do. b6 is played, but this is a threat white can now ignore. Picking up a pawn on c6 and throwing a punch at the knight. Pawn takes knight. Rook takes knight with check. King to g8. Rook to c6, and now Henrik goes in for a small combination that nets a pawn, but in just a move or two later, Magnus is getting that pawn back. So let's see this little combination. Rook takes g2. King takes g2, with now the follow-up, bishop to d5 with the fork. After king g3 and bishop takes rook, however, rook c1 is the last move this game saw. At this point, Team Black, Henrik, Magnus's dad threw in the towel at this stage. The c-pawn is a goner, and as mentioned earlier, the rook is just far too superior to the bishop in this endgame. If this game was to continue, king f7, rook takes pawn, and in fact we're already seeing that once the bishop moves, we're going to have rook to c7, and there goes another pawn. And we got two runners here, two passed pawns that are soon to score a touchdown. But as it played out in this game, rook to c1 was the last one, and Magnus's father threw in the towel at this stage. So, an interesting game, son versus father, and I don't know how I would feel if I was paired up against my father at a tournament. I don't know. How would you feel? Maybe you can share your thoughts in the comment section below. Yeah, how would you feel if you were paired up against a family member? Maybe this is something that's happened with you at a chess tournament. And also another question, I think it'd be pretty cool to see in the comments, how did you get introduced to the game? I think many players can relate to being introduced to this game by their father. I know that was the case for me, so I learned when I was 8. And yeah, feel free to share maybe what age you learned the game and who introduced you to the great game of chess in the comment section below. Feel free to leave that feedback. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this game. As usual, appreciate any feedback and hope you're having a great day. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.